Damn it, I really should have seen it coming. With a bit of foresight, it should have been obvious, like two trains racing towards each other on the same track. But maybe I wasn't looking hard enough. Maybe I wasn't thinking things through that well, and I suppose I could use the excuse that one train was hiding in a tunnel. But all the warning signs were there if I'd only looked hard enough for them. Instead, I was kind of blinded by the girl. So when that other train came roaring out of that bleeding tunnel, I just had no idea what was coming. Okay, enough with the bleeding metaphors. Let's get down to brass tacks. All through my school life, they must have been there. Well, they were there, but you kind of didn't notice that there were two of them. They weren't really two people, more like a single entity, Mercedes CLA and Portia Rowan. Two girls, one personality. As I remember, all through school, they were referred to as the twins. They dressed alike, spoke alike, their hair was styled the same. They were like a pair of twins, but they might as well have been joined at the hip. Now, don't get the idea that they were standoffish or anything. Once they were in their teens, they dated boys all the time. The only problem was that they only double dated. If a guy fancied one of them, he not only had to get her attention, he had to find a suitable date for the other one. I must admit I liked the look of both of them, but I never did get to know either of them well. I couldn't be bothered to play this silly double date game. A guy would run around for weeks trying to find a suitable candidate. The girls were bloody choosy when they wanted to be, and from what I heard, they often wanted to be. It was probably all a game to them anyway. The problem never came up for me because when I was 16, my old man talked my Uncle Harry into taking me on as an apprentice builder. That was my old man all over. Get an apprenticeship, boy, and you'll have a job for life. The only problem with that bloody apprenticeship was that I had to go and live with my Uncle Harry and Aunt Mavis in London. The big city and bright lights. We lived in the suburbs, and most of Uncle Harry's and my work was out in the suburbs as well. I had one day and one evening a week at a technical college, also in the suburbs. Uncle Harry wanted blood for his money, so by the time I got home at night, I was so knackered that traveling into town wasn't an option. Add to that, Uncle Harry was a bleeding workaholic. Actually, a correction there. He was under the impression that I** was a bleeding workaholic. He always had little jobs lined up for the weekends. You miss a day's work during the week to go to college. You make it up on the weekends. So my planned monthly weekend trips home soon became hardly monthly. You get the idea. I got home 3 times the first year, and besides Christmas, once the second year. By the end of the third year, my dog had started growling at me. The stranger walking in the door of my parents' home was me. There was even a bloody lodger sleeping in my room. I had to share my little brother's room. Apprenticeship over, I decided I'd had enough of working for Uncle Harry. I don't think he was too pleased when I took my leave. Bollocks to him. The old bugger got his money's worth. Home wasn't home anymore, if you get my drift. I'd managed to save a lot of the meager salary Uncle Harry paid me over the years, so I had enough in the bank to put down a security deposit and rent a little flat of my own back in my hometown. Work wasn't a problem either. I had my papers and soon got on the books of one of the local firms. The work was hard, but at least the money was spectacular compared to what Uncle Harry had been paying me. Builders who really knew what they were doing weren't exactly rare, but they were a bit thin on the ground back then. Well, young ones were. Before I realized it, I was working on a site of about 50 new houses. Once that site was finished, I was offered a job by a smaller builder on a barn conversion. It was a small job, only about 6 of us on the site, and the owner was around most days. The boss and I were studying the plans one day over a cup of tea, and I just happened to mention that there'd be a blank area on the front of the building. I said that if it were my place, I'd make some changes that would make it look better. The boss pushed the artist's impression drawing of the finished house at me and said, "Show me." So I roughly sketched in the changes I thought would be improvements. Later that day, I was called into the little shed we used as a site office. There, I found the boss, the owner of the house, and the architect. After some strong words were exchanged between the architect and the owner, my changes were added to the plan. On the day we handed the newly converted house over, the architect came over to me and said, "Son, you're in the wrong business. You should have been a bloody architect." A couple of weeks later, I signed up for a part-time college course to learn architecture. I still worked on building sites to earn money for my studies, but I was heading into the design side of the business. It was in the college library that I first saw her. I had just sat down at one of the large tables to look up some references. When a young lady on the other side of the table looked up from her book, our eyes met briefly, and she gave me a wonderful smile before returning to her reading. The face was familiar, but I couldn't place it. I sat there, confused, and stared at her. She was a very good-looking young woman. Some minutes later, she looked at me again. I quickly looked down at the book I was studying. Pretending I hadn't been staring at her out of the corner of my eye, I was aware of her getting up from the table and walking around it until she was standing beside me. Embarrassed that she'd seen me watching her, I didn't raise my head and tried to stay lost in the book before me. The young lady reached out and rotated my book 180 degrees. She said, "You'll find it easier to read, Roger, if it's the right way up." I looked up at her. "You don't recognize me, do you, Roger?" "Mercedes? Mercedes Clooney. You've changed somewhat." "Do I take that as a compliment?" "Of course you do. But where's Tish?" "Portia is in the States doing an internship. We were both supposed to be on a gap year from uni and got placements together in the States, but mine fell through, so Tish went on her own." "You two do everything together?" "Well, normally we do, but it was too good an opportunity for her to pass up." "When did she go?" "About a month or so back. I thought I'd spend a year brushing up my Spanish, so I signed on here. Mercedes, or Dia, as she was known at school, and I talked for a while until the librarian came over and told us to be quiet. Then we adjourned to the refectory. By the time she had to go to her class, we had made a date for that evening. Well, kind of. I was driving her home from college in my van that night. As I was doing some private work on the side, I bought myself an old van to carry all my gear around. I did wonder what her folks thought when my tatty old van with ladders on top pulled up outside their upmarket house. That evening, Dia and I sat in the van for some time, chatting about school days and the like. In the end, I asked her to go out with me the following evening. It could be that I should have picked up something in her reply. With hindsight, I think I should have. "That would be nice, Roger. I haven't been out since Tish went away." I arrived at her house about 7:30 that Friday evening. The door was opened by her father, who looked me over like I was something the cat had dragged in. The expression on his face when he looked at my van was something I can't describe. I was shown into the lounge, where Dia's mother and her younger sister were sitting, to wait until Dia was ready. Dia's mother was very pleasant, and so was her sister. I remembered Dia's sister, Estelle, from school. To be honest, I think I got the old swooning looks from her. It struck me that Dia's father didn't like me. This is not an uncommon attitude for a father to take. After all, he was young once and knew how most young guys' minds worked. Standard fatherly protective behavior, if you ask me. When Dia entered the room, my jaw dropped. Remember, I'd known Dia since she was a little kid. The day before, I was struck by her pleasant face and nice figure, but there was no way I was prepared for the woman who walked into the lounge that evening. Was it Bobby V who sang asterisk poetry, in motion asterisk? Well, there it was standing before me. I think my heart stopped beating for a moment. I definitely remember I found speech impossible for quite some time. That evening, we went to a local night spot, not flashy, just a pub with live music and a dance floor of sorts. Although we danced a few times, Dia and I spent most of the evening talking. Don't, for Christ's sake, ask me what we talked about because I haven't got the slightest recollection. I can just tell you that whenever we got together, we talked most of the time, no matter what the subject. We appeared to agree on just about everything. Except one thing, Portia. I had no interest in Portia at all, although I feigned interest to keep Dea happy. It was clear to me that she had been missing her almost lifelong companion, and I suppose it was really understandable. I just wished I'd understood at the time that Portia was the other train I was talking about. Hiding in that bloody tunnel. Well, that first date, and a little kiss I got at the end of it, led to a second and third date following in quick succession. By the end of the month, Mercedes and I had become an item. When we weren't either at college or working, we were together. I would find her waiting by my van when I came out of my evening college classes, and on the days I was at college, she would meet me for lunch. To be honest, I was besotted with her. And from what she said, and how she behaved, I thought she was besotted with me. Mercedes joined me in my bed for the first time after we'd been together about 3 months. For some reason, she couldn't use the pill, so we had to resort to other means of protection against pregnancy. I've got to say it kind of took the edge off the moment and spoiled the mood a little. Consequently, we didn't get to actual intercourse very often. We found other ways to satisfy our desires. I knew that Mercedes was writing to and receiving letters from Portia all the time, but I didn't know the effect they were having on our relationship. Sexual preferences and interests evolved over time. When we first became intimate in early December, Mercedes was not interested in exploring oral sex. However, by February, her perspective had changed, and she expressed a desire to try it. What was once viewed as something she was hesitant about became a new area of enthusiasm for her, and she increasingly encouraged and enjoyed these experiences. After some time, Mercedes started talking about getting engaged. We had both been discussing it for a while, but it was around that time we started talking seriously about getting engaged and getting married. I bought her a ring in late July, and we planned to get married right after she took her finals at university the following summer. Mercedes' mother was over the moon about our plan, but her father wasn't as enthusiastic. I think he thought his daughter could do better than a bloody builder, as I heard him say on more than one occasion when he thought I was out of earshot. Estelle told me straight that she wanted me to drop Mercedes and marry her instead. It was early August when Portia returned from the States. She had an American boyfriend in tow. I've got to say I didn't like the geezer from the start. To my mind, he was everything I didn't like in Yanks all rolled into one. He was a brash type, forever bragging about himself and how clever he was. Now, don't get the idea that I don't like Americans. I've got some good friends from across the pond. There was an American air base near our town, and I'd grown up with a lot of American friends. My first proper girlfriend, while still at school, had come from Chicago. No, like all nationalities, there are some who give all a bad name, and George Greenlake was one of those. While he was in the country, he stayed at Portia's parents' house. Of course, there was no way that the Rowans were going to let him and Portia share a bed, as they had apparently been doing while Portia was over there in America. Portia and George had only been in the country a couple of days, and I hadn't met either of them yet. I came home from work one evening to find Mercedes sitting in the kitchen of my flat. She'd had her own key for some time. There were 3 coffee cups on the table, which I gave a cursory glance as I took Mercedes into my arms and kissed her. I told her I wouldn't be a couple of minutes changing, and then we'd go out to eat. "You can't go in there yet," Mercedes blurted out. I looked at her. "Tish and George are using our bed." "Like hell they are," I said. Actually, a very apt statement on my part. But I'm one of those people who believe in the old adage, an Englishman's home is his castle, and in my home, the most personal item of furniture is my bleeding bed. This probably goes back to me returning to my parents' house from Uncle Harry's and finding a lodger sleeping in my bed. I think they must have heard my outburst because it was only a couple of minutes later that Portia and George entered the kitchen, still in the throes of getting dressed. For all their apologies, they didn't change the sheets or even make the bed. Mercedes assured me that they didn't ask her permission to use my bed. We were so close by then that everything was referred to as ours. From the way George and Portia behaved, I've always believed Mercedes on that one. They acted as if they were the most important people in the world. While George was in the country, The four of us hung around together, although Portia borrowed her father's car most of the time, as there were only 3 seats in the front of my van. Not that Portia wanted to lower herself to ride in it anyway. I steadfastly refused to ride in Portia's father's car because, once they were away from her house, George was doing the driving. Mercedes always rode with me. I've got to say that it was with some sick amusement that I watched him drive out of a pub car park one evening, straight into the front of a bus. I was sounding my horn, and I think that was why the bus driver managed to bring the bus to a standstill before George drove into it, so there wasn't too much damage. George had tried to drive along the wrong side of the road, a common mistake for foreigners to make. As I had surmised, George was not insured to drive the car and wasn't in possession of an international license, although the police appeared happy to accept his American license once Portia's father arrived at the scene. I took Dia home. I don't know what ramifications there were to the incident. George flew home the following weekend. September was upon us before we really knew what was happening. Suddenly, my tattied old van took on a new significance. Both Tish and Dia had to get all of their gear to the flat they were sharing at uni, so Portia was quite happy to travel in my van once all her junk was stashed, along with Dia's. Portia was on the not-favored daughter list with her father after he discovered his new Saab buried in the front of that bus, so he hadn't volunteered to drive her up. All too soon, the girls were gone. Not that I cared too much about Tish being away again, but I was soon missing Dia. Hey, I wasn't the only one missing her. In all the time we'd been going out together, I'd been invited to Dia's house for a meal once, and I really think that was only because I needed to ask her father for her hand in marriage officially. The week after the girls left, Dia's mother called me and invited me to Sunday lunch. As I've said, I appeared to get on just fine with Dia's mother and her sister Estelle. Now, Dia's father started calling me son and even asked me to join him in a round of golf. Not one of my sports, but I could see I was going to have to take it up after Dia and I were married. Gotta keep the in-laws happy, I figured. I suspected there was a bit of an ulterior motive in these invitations to meals. On the weekends when Dia came home every month to visit, we would spend a lot of time at her parents' house. Now that I was a regular and apparently welcome visitor there once a month, I drove up to spend the weekend with Dia, although that wasn't how it usually worked out. Most of the time, Tish was with us. Her main topic of conversation was George and how she was going back to the States to marry him when she had her degree. Tish also had the infuriating habit of coming home with Dia as well. She slept at her parents' house, but appeared to spend most of her time at Dia's parents' place. Well, let's be precise. She spent most of her time wherever Dia was. That included the little time Dia spent at my flat. By the time Christmas came around, plans for our marriage were in full swing. Let's be fair, Dia's mother was just about organizing everything, along with Estelle. I think Dia and I were just agreeing to everything that they wanted to do. Hey, I wasn't paying. It was Dia's old man who was footing the bill. I would just say, "Are you all right with this, Frank?" He'd nod and say, "Wait till it's your turn, son. Take my advice and only have boys." I suppose he wasn't that bad a stick, really. As far as Estelle was concerned, this marriage was only a rehearsal for what she termed the big one. Frank would look at me and raise his eyebrows when she said that. Well, everything was going along just great until just after Easter when Portia got the bleeding Dear Jane letter. You know what I mean. George dumped her for some other girl. I told you he was a complete arse. Portia wasn't my favorite person, but I saw that letter. He was an insensitive a hole, as they say over there. It was a few weeks later that Dia first said she wanted to push back the wedding. Portia was originally getting married a couple of weeks before us. Now Dia wanted to postpone her wedding by a month or so because Tish was upset. The girls graduated and moved back home in my van again. They both got jobs pretty quickly. Nothing special, just local banks, though different ones. I was, of course, still juggling college and work, although I was working on my own a lot more. I even had a couple of blokes working for me on occasion. I would generally see Dia most days to start with. But as time went on, she took to going out with Tish. First 1 night a week, and then 2. Then suddenly, she stopped meeting me after my night classes. Now she was with Tish 3 nights a week. Not that anything untoward was going on. I was too well known in town for anyone to get clever with my girl, and that was what Dia was known as by then. Okay, the month or so the wedding was put back became until after Christmas. As Christmas approached, Dia wanted to push it back further until Easter. Up until that point, I'd been patient. I realized that Tish was her friend, but it seemed to me that we were going to have to wait until Tish found herself another mug before Dia was going to walk up the aisle with me. It all came to a head in early December. I arrived at Dia's house to pick her up around 7:30. Dia and Tish were car sharing, going to work that night. Neither had come home yet. Dia hadn't called me to put me off, and neither had called home to tell their parents of any change of plans. I was not a happy bunny and went looking for Dia's car. It wasn't hard to find as our town isn't very big. I found it in the car park of one of the pubs on the outskirts of town. Inside, I discovered Dia and Tish sitting there with some prat. They were so enthralled with the line he was throwing at Tish that they didn't notice me enter. I bought a drink and positioned myself on the other side of the room. I sat watching as a meal arrived for them, and they all sat and ate it. I did note that Dia was drinking only non-alcoholic drinks. It was gone 9 before they got up to leave. Both girls were apparently still enthralled with everything coming out of the arsehole's mouth. Jesus, talk about a line of crap. The wanker wouldn't know one end of a gun from the other. They must have gotten right out to her car before Dia spotted my van parked alongside it. She came dashing back in and looked around for me. I was at that time in conversation with a couple of guys I knew. "Roger, how long have you been here?" Dia asked as she came up to my table, followed by Tish and the wanker. "Since about 8 o'clock. My fiancé stood me up this evening, so I thought I'd have a quiet drink by myself. Why didn't you come over and join us? You must have seen us sitting there." "Oh, I did, don't you worry. But you didn't really want me along, did you? If you had, you would have called and invited me to join the party, wouldn't you? What was it? Does the Flash want to have a threesome or something? How can you say such a thing?" Rodney demanded. You slimy little git." I began. Yes, I was childishly taking my frustrations out on the little prat, but he really should have kept his bleeding mouth shut. If he had, he could well have gotten out of it with some dignity. Anyway, he had been telling the girls how much of a tough guy he was all bleeding night. Anyone in the SAS can handle themselves, even the bloody pen pushers. Once we took the argument out into the car park, and there wasn't an audience anymore, he wasn't so brave. As a matter of fact, he did a runner after trying to slam the pub's door in my face. The automatic gas closer prevented that. "Did you have to do that?" "Tish liked him," Dia demanded. "I didn't do anything, Dia." The little tosspot talked himself into a corner and then into a fight that he didn't hang around for. All I did was get stood up by my fiancé and go out for a quiet drink to drown my sorrows. Good night. I returned to the bar to finish my pint. Dia came back inside for no more than a minute or so. She and Tish had a whispered conversation, and then they left. Well, the train was blowing its bloody whistle as it came roaring out of that tunnel. The following evening, I didn't go around to Dia's house at the usual time to pick her up at 7:30. She let herself in the door of my flat. "What's up with you? Why didn't you pick me up? We were supposed to be going to see that film this evening." "Oh, I forgot." "Don't talk rubbish. This is about last night, isn't it?" "Not exactly. This is about you and me and your friendship with Tish." "What has Tish got to do with it?" "Everything. If Tish weren't around, we'd be married by now. But for some reason, you've decided not to marry me until Tish finds some mug to marry her. Well, I'm not waiting anymore. The wedding goes off in February, or there's not going to be a wedding. Secondly, you will see Tish just 2 nights a week from now on, the 2 evenings that I'm at college. You can't make demands like that. Oh, but I can. I'm supposed to be the guy you want to spend the rest of your life with, but you worry more about Tish than you do about me. Now, I suggest you go home and think about what you really want. You can bring me your answer tomorrow night. I'll be here until, shall we say, 9 o'clock. But Tish and I are going to that rock concert tomorrow night. It's Portia's favorite group. She'll be really upset to miss them. And I know she won't go alone. I won't have time to come here before we go, so I already have my answer. It's your choice, Dia, Tish, or me. Think about it if you will. If you're not here tomorrow evening before 9 o'clock, everything's off. You can either keep or sell the ring. I wouldn't want it in my flat. It would have too many bad memories. Dia tried to talk me around, but I refused to listen to her. To be honest, I was tired of being a fish on the line. Either we got married, or I would have to cut my losses. As I expected, Dia tried to circumvent things. My phone was ringing when I got home from work. Caller ID told me it was from Dia's house. I ignored it. It rang at regular intervals until 6 when she was due to leave for the concert. At 6:10, it rang again. The caller ID told me it was from Tish's parents' house. The phone rang a couple more times a little later, I assumed from call boxes, as the ID was withheld. At 9 o'clock, I left the flat and went over to a friend's place from where I could watch mine. Brian's a nice old boy who had really become like a surrogate father to me. I'm afraid that letting my bedroom to a lodger without even asking or telling me first had almost completely destroyed my relationship with my father and family. It was gone 12 when Dia's car pulled into the car park. Dia got out, followed by Tish and the guy from the previous evening. Dia went up to my flat, which was all in darkness. The other two waited by the car. She let herself in, and I watched the lights going on and off as she searched the flat for me. Dia then went back down to her car, where she talked with the other two for a while. Then Tish and the guy got into Dia's car and drove off. Dia then returned to the flat. I made myself comfortable on Brian's sofa. He did suggest I go home and talk it out with Dia, but I figured she made her decision at 6 o'clock. I wasn't prepared to play second fiddle to Portia and Dia's affections, no matter what it cost me. Brian could see the car park from his bedroom, and he came out to tell me that Dia's car had returned. About half an hour later, I went back into his kitchen and watched Tish go up and into the flat. Dia obviously wanted some moral support. By 8:30 in the morning, neither girl had left the flat. Actually, I painted myself into a bit of a corner. There was no way I could get out of Brian's flat without them seeing me. Now I know I was playing silly games, but I wanted them to be wondering where I was. It was obvious that neither girl was going to work that day. They were planning on waiting me out. After all, I'd have to put in an appearance to get my van. Well, that's how I think their minds were working. The masterstroke I came up with to get past that one was to call a guy who was working for me. I had him come around and drive my van to the site where we were supposed to be working that day. It worked like a dream. It was only when the old van's engine started that the girls realized what was going on. They came running down the stairs and jumped into Dia's car, then set off in hot pursuit of the van. I suppose they thought I was driving it. I went down and got into my car. Now that was something they didn't know about. I'd finally bought the car that Dia and I were supposed to be going on honeymoon in. I drove it over to the house I'd bought. Another secret from Dia. This was the house I thought we were going to start our married life in. At that moment in time, it looked like a building site, as the guys hadn't finished yet. Well, I kept putting the date back every time the wedding date went back. There wasn't much to finish, so I got stuck in there for the day and slept there that night. The following day was a college day for me, and I couldn't miss it. Although the building work was coming along just great, and I was earning extremely well, I still had designs on becoming an architect. Having the car that Dia didn't know about was my saving grace that day. Several times I spotted both girls around the college, but they didn't see me or even know I was there. I've got to say that at this juncture, if Dia had been alone, I most probably would have spoken to her. Possibly. We could have sorted things out, but I somehow doubt it. Tish's presence prevented me from going to Dia. That evening, I called the flat. Brian had just called me and told me that Portia had left Dia there alone. "Roger, where are you?" "That's none of your business." "Roger, I'm sorry, but I couldn't let Portia go to that concert alone." "But she wouldn't have been alone, would she, Dia? She had that little wonker with her. He's Tish's boyfriend, you know that. I'm your girl. You were at one time, Dia, but you're not anymore. Tell me, did you tell your mother to go ahead with the February wedding date?" "Well, no, I didn't. You were acting so strange the other night." "You're the one who's acting strange. I told you last night was your chance to decide whom you wanted to be with, Portia or me. You chose Portia. It's over between us. There's nothing left to say." "But I couldn't leave my friend on her own." "Why not? She left you on your own when she went to the States, didn't she? Do you think she cared about you when she was planning to marry that wanker she met over there?" "Dia, I'm not playing second fiddle to Portia for the rest of my life. It's over. The engagement is off. The wedding is off. And you are out of my life. Goodbye, and please leave that flat tidy. I don't live there anymore, as you've no doubt noticed by now." "Where are you living, Roger?" "In the house I had bought for your wedding present, but you chose not to live here with me. Goodbye, Dia. I hope you find what you were looking for." With that, I hung up the phone. It was the following evening that Dia's father and mother paid me a call. Of course, they knew about the house. I discussed almost everything with them. In my opinion, my relationship with Dia's father had always been tenuous to say the least, so I thought that telling them about the house was a wise thing to do. They had kept my secrets from Dia. Both the car and the house were supposed to have been wedding surprises for her. I was surprised that they actually understood my position. It became apparent to me that, although I didn't think I would have been Dia's father's first choice for a son-in-law, they actually hoped that Dia's affection for me would separate her from Portia. As it turned out, that didn't happen. It was a very sad parting that evening, and they wished me the best. I gather they never told Dia that they knew about the house, where it was, or that they had come to see me. They told me straight out that they wouldn't ask me to change my mind and take Dia back. They had hoped Dia's love for me would break the hold Portia seemed to have over her, but now they had come to believe Dia would always be under Portia's influence. Dia did try to speak to me whenever she saw me for the next few months. The trouble was, she was always in Portia's company when she did see me. I had no intention of talking to her in that girl's presence. I also gathered she was still telling people that we were engaged. Here, she ran into a problem. I had moved on with my life, or to put it more truthfully, I was trying to move on, and I was not finding it easy. I had started dating other girls, more than anything to try and take my mind off Dia. I must add, not very successfully. However, one of the girls I had gone out with, who apparently had designs on making it a permanent arrangement, just happened to overhear someone else saying we were still engaged. From what I heard, that encounter resulted in a real catfight. But after that, I never heard any more reports of Dia claiming we were still engaged. Time passed, as it inevitably does. At the end of that year of college, I gave up on the idea of becoming an architect. The reason I gave everyone was that my building work had really taken off in a big way, which, in truth, it had. I'm not sure where my reputation for quality workmanship actually came from, but apparently I had built one. In truth, Dia had signed up for a design course that I needed to take. I saw her name on the list when I went to register for the next year. Don't ask me how she talked her way into that course, but she did. I decided not to register. I threw myself into my new and expanding business. Funny that I had started working for myself so that I could do my architect thing. It gave me the opportunity to choose my own working hours to suit my studies. Suddenly, I was one of the most respected small builders in town and run off my feet with work. I didn't see much of Dia or Portia. Estelle would turn up at my house every so often. I think she made it pretty plain that she thought she was in the running for becoming Dia's replacement. In my heart, looking back, I think I did love Estelle, but I would assist her, not as a prospective life partner. So, I told her that would never happen. At the time, I knew I liked the girl and felt a genuine affection for her, but if I had gotten emotionally involved with her, I would be forever running into Dia. That would have made life too complicated, and it was something I wanted to avoid. As time went on, I saw less and less of Estelle. It must have been nearly 2 years after I broke up with Dia that I met up with Shirley again. She was an old friend from my school days. Whereas Dia and Portia had been a year behind me in my brother's class, Shirley had been one of my peers. We'd gotten on well together in school, and I suppose if I hadn't gone off to my Uncle Harry's, we might have gotten together sooner. Shirley was always a good laugh to be with. Well, she always had been at school. She did have a little bit of a reputation for putting out, but I had never pursued her on those grounds. Shirley was just fun to be with. Now, I'm not claiming I felt the same way about Shirley as I had about Dia. I know I quickly grew to love Shirley, but Dia had been my first real love. Many people have told me that your first love is something different, and I have cause to agree with them. Anyway, 8 months after we got together, Shirley and I married in the local registry office. It wasn't the big affair that Dia's mother had planned for Dia and me, but it was what we wanted. Well, needed. Actually, time was always going to be a very important factor in Shirley's and my relationship. You see, it was shortly after we started going together that Shirley was diagnosed with cancer. It went into remission after she had her first batch of chemotherapy right after the wedding, but it was the sword of Damocles hanging over us. The next 5 years of my life I devoted to Shirley and building my business. Even in her condition, Shirley was always fun to be with, and she did me the honor of presenting me with 2 wonderful daughters. It was in our 5th year as man and wife that Shirley's cancer returned with a vengeance. Chemotherapy did little this time except make Shirley feel pretty terrible. In the end, she made the decision to refuse any further treatment other than painkillers. We managed to spend another 3 years together before she finally took her leave of us. Our 2 daughters took it in their stride. Their mother had prepared them for that day from the moment they were born. It was they who really supported me that cold January day of the funeral. It was also they who invited everyone back to the house for the wake, 6- and 7-year-olds taking charge of almost everything, while their father wandered around in a daze, feeling sorry for himself. Shirley had done a really good job with them. My company had done a lot of renovation work for the church at a discount, as it was Shirley's church. Personally, I'm not really into the religion thing, but we had rebuilt the boundary wall after an old yew tree had died and fallen on it. The tree had been there for many hundreds of years. Its demise and removal had left a few new grave plots very near the church's main door. I had spoken to the vicar and reserved one of these newly available plots for Shirley. Shirley was a lively person, and I thought she would like having a plot near where everything was going on. I thought she deserved that. Whether I believe or don't believe, it was Shirley's grave, although I suppose one day I'll be in there with her. Of those who came back to the house, I was surprised to find Dia's father, Frank, and Estelle among them. They both gave me their condolences personally. They also told me that Dia's mother was ill in the hospital, or she would have been there with them. As a result of that conversation, a few days later, I called into the hospital to see her. She was actually in the same ward that Shirley had been in during her last days. I had been too preoccupied with my wife to notice her or anyone else who was in there. Luckily, Dia's mother was recovering from her illness, although I never did find out exactly what it had been. Catherine, as she now insisted I call her, asked me if I'd take my 2 girls to see her when she got home. Apparently, she'd spoken to Shirley often in her last days, and Shirley had talked about the children, and me all the time. I don't suppose I'll ever know what those conversations between Shirley and Catherine were really about. I wasn't allowed to take the children into the hospital to see Catherine, as they were too young, and were not her direct relatives. What stupid rules these places have. Both girls had been in there almost every day to see their mother. Catherine informed me that Dia was not living at home anymore, so there would be no chance of us accidentally running into each other. That was the only time she mentioned Dia, or Mercedes as she always called her, to me. So 3 weeks later, I took my 2 girls to meet the people who were to become like grandparents to them, not forgetting Estelle, who became a kind of surrogate aunt. As a matter of fact, Estelle started turning up at my house all the time again. So often, in fact, that my neighbors thought there was something going on between us. That is, until her boyfriend Russell started turning up with her as well. He was a nice guy who was dying with impatience to marry Estelle, but for some reason, she was keeping him hanging on, much like her sister did with me. They were both very helpful when it came to looking after the girls. I had considered hiring a nanny, but was trying to get by without one if I could. These were my girls. I didn't want a stranger looking after them too much. Once Russell told me about how frustrated he was getting with Estelle, not making up her mind about marrying him. I had a quiet word with her. I told her to think very carefully about what had happened between Dia and me. I asked Estelle why she wasn't grabbing a really nice guy while she had the chance. Her answer was one that I couldn't understand. "You really don't know, do you?" she said. Well, I didn't have an answer for that question, but whatever. A couple of weeks later, Estelle finally named the day. Russell, apparently convinced that I had talked Estelle into accepting his proposal of marriage, asked me to be his best man. And I said yes. Was that a mistake? I guess I'll never really know. It stood to reason that Dia would be there. I wasn't sure how either of us was going to handle that. But it was a question I chose not to worry Estelle with. The day of the wedding was a beautifully sunny June day. I was standing with Russell at the front of the church as Mendelssohn's Wedding March began to play. My 2 girls were Estelle's bridesmaids and were being shepherded by the maid of honor, Marion, another old school friend of ours. Marion and I were quite good friends at school. It crossed my mind that Estelle might have been trying to play matchmaker. Estelle went out of her way to give me a big smile as she approached Russell at the altar. Then she turned her attention to her husband-to-be. It was about halfway through the service that there was somewhat of a commotion at the back of the church. I cringed as I heard a loud American voice that I recognized. Then they came clumping down the side aisle to take their seats among Estelle's family and friends. I tried not to look, but you know how it is. A quick glance confirmed that it was Portia and George who had arrived late. I actually heard Estelle say, the poor girl had forgotten she was wearing a radio microphone. So most of the people in the congregation must have heard her as well. It's a shame that some of them didn't take the hint and leave. I was curious as to why they had been invited in the first place. The disturbance during the service carried on until its normal conclusion. As we began parading out of the church, Catherine turned to me. God, we never thought they would have the cheek to turn up. The insensitive buggers. We thought we were safe in sending them an invite as they live in America. It was as we got near the back of the church that I saw her sitting there, flanked by a couple of other women. Dia did not look very happy, and her presence obviously surprised Catherine as her step faltered for a moment. But then she soon recovered her poise, and with a smile and a little nod to Dia, she continued with the parade. Dia avoided eye contact with me, or did I avoid eye contact with her? It was obvious to me that something had happened in this family that I knew nothing about. I knew they had never mentioned Dia to me since I'd been reunited with them, but I put that down to their being sensitive to my feelings. That, it appeared, was obviously not the case. Outside the church, we had the obligatory photo call. I noted that Dia was not in the lineup. I saw Estelle motion for her to join the line a couple of times, but Dia didn't move. In the end, Estelle looked over at me and gestured with her eyes and head. She didn't have to say anything. I knew what she wanted. Slipping off to one side, I circled the watching crowd until I was behind Dia. Taking her firmly by the arm, I marched her into the lineup. Take that frown off your face and smile, woman. This is your sister's wedding, I said to her in as commanding a tone as I could whisper. What have I got to smile about? Dia replied. "A damn sight more than my wife has," I said. "That was her grave you were almost standing on back there." Dia wasn't really, but I think that did the trick by reminding her that other people had worse problems than she did. "Oh my God, I'm sorry, Roger," Dia blurted out. "Well, don't be. Just remember you're alive, so you have got something to smile about." One of the ushers, who was on the ball, threw me a small bouquet, the same as my girls were carrying, and I pushed it into Dia's hands before I regained my position in the line. I think Dia did manage a smile, but she didn't look like the happiest girl in the world. With the photo call over, I started ushering people into the limousines that were taking everyone to the reception. My two girls demanded a cuddle, and I had to tell them both how wonderful and clever they had been as they got into their car. I noted that my girls no longer had their bouquets. Dia had disappeared back into the crowd again after the photo call. That was somewhat of a relief, I suppose. One of the ushers must have found her a seat in one of the cars. Portia came up and said hello. I'm afraid I can't repeat what I said to her and what role George had in the conversation. I wasn't the slightest bit interested in how they got back together again. Before I left the church, I went over to Shirley's grave. There were 3 small bouquets of flowers lying there, along with the large bouquet I'd put there when I arrived. I had a quick word with her, as I always did when I was there. Funny how we do that, isn't it? I've got no belief in the afterlife, but I still stand by Shirley's grave. I talk to her as if she's actually there and can hear me. At the hotel where the reception was being held, it became obvious that Dia's presence had not been expected. After Catherine had left the welcoming line, she was dashing around rearranging the seating at the top table to fit Dia in. I helped her, but I did not think it was the time to inquire about what had occurred in the family. Once the meal and the speeches were over, I thought I could relax a little. You know, when someone asks you to be his best man, you tend to say yes without thinking about everything that is involved. I wasn't prepared for what Russell said about me in his speech. He announced to all and sundry that Estelle had had a crush on me for years. He thanked me for persuading her to marry him instead. In my speech, I had to tell everyone that I'd only known the guy a few months, but my daughters had assured me he was a suitable husband for Estelle. Both my girls liked Russell, and Estelle a lot. With all that out of the way, the dancing started. Estelle and Russell danced first, followed by the parents. Then it was my turn with the bridesmaids. Marion was wonderful with them. We both picked up a girl each and then danced around in a foursome. My girls thought that was great. Then Estelle and Russell joined us. I don't think there's ever been a waltz dance like that before. I noted that Dia had chosen to sit with the girls she'd been in the church with, well away from the family table where her parents and I were sitting. Later, Estelle came up and asked me to dance with her. I took the opportunity to ask her what the story was with Dia. Not now, Roger. I'll meet you in the reception in about 10 minutes and tell you all about it there. Someone might overhear us out here. I somehow doubted it, but she was the boss on this one. After our dance, I watched as she went over to Russell. They had a quick chat, and I saw him nodding his head in agreement. Then Estelle made her way to the ladies' powder room. I knew it had another door to the foyer, so I went out there to meet her. We sat down in a corner, and she began. When you and Dia broke up, Mom and Dad went mad at her. You know they were always worried about her relationship with Portia. No, they never thought it was anything sexual or anything like that, if that's what you're thinking. They had never liked the influence Portia seemed to have over Dia. Then you came along, and well, they were over the moon. Hang on. Frank wasn't that keen on me. Don't kid yourself. Dad thought you were the greatest thing since sliced bread. He just enjoyed playing the proud father part and thought that if he was too enthusiastic, he might scare you off. But who do you think was telling everyone that you were the greatest builder in the world? Oh, he still does that every chance he gets, by the way. Anyway, when Dia started messing you around, putting the wedding date back and the like, well, all of us really kept warning Dia that she was going to lose you if she wasn't careful. And it happened, didn't it? You got fed up with waiting, and called the whole thing off. There were only two people to blame, Dia and Portia. Oh, Portia was always telling Dia she could do better than you, and to make you wait until Dia was ready. Of course, it wasn't Dia who was going to have to be ready. It was until Portia didn't need her anymore. Dia never could see how Portia used her. Hang on, you invited Portia to your wedding. We didn't have much choice, really. Portia's father is a business partner of Dad's. But we didn't think she, and that ignorant pig she's married to, would actually have the front to turn up. So what happened between the family and Dia? Ah, that's a really sore point. About a year or so after you broke up with Dia, I think it was just after you married Shirley, George turned up again and asked Portia to marry him. I don't know what happened with that other one of his. Perhaps she realized what kind of person he is. Of course, Portia jumped at the chance. And before anyone knew what was happening, they were married and living in the States. Poor old Dia was dumped just like she was when Portia went off on that gap year. I think it was then that she realized how Portia used her. She lost the only man she ever loved because she had wanted to desert her friend, who repaid her by dropping Dia like a stone when she found herself a man. I'm afraid Dia went a bit weird after that happened. You know she had a breakdown, don't you? Oh, you didn't. Portia dumping her right after you married Shirley was too much for her to take. You know that Portia had convinced Dia you'd come crawling back to her when she decided she wanted to go ahead with the marriage. Well, your marriage to Shirley had burst that little bubble. Poor Dia needed someone to blame, so she blamed the family. Of course, that didn't make any sense, but she blamed us just like she did when Samantha went. Sorry, Estelle, you've lost me there. Who the hell is Samantha? Oh God, hasn't anyone ever told you about Sam? She was Dia's twin. Oh hell, I didn't know. You didn't know about her. Sam and Dia were identical twins. Sam died from meningitis when they were 8 or 9. Dia took it very badly, really. They were inseparable, honestly. You couldn't tell them apart. Dia went very funny for a year or so after Sam passed away. Then Dia took up with Portia. We all thought them being together was great for a long time because we had the old Dia back. Well, that was until Mom and Dad realized that Portia was using Dia. Dia seemed to be at Portia's beck and call. Look, I was quite young when Sam died. Mother should be the one to tell you about Sam. Anyway, after Portia went off, Dad had to put Dia into a clinic for a while. They straightened her out pretty quickly, really, but she felt very guilty about the way she had behaved towards us and blaming us for her own mistakes, and could never bring herself to face us again. She felt so guilty about it that she moved away to London. Mind you, I've got to tell you that feeling she couldn't face us was not the only reason she moved away. It was also so that she wouldn't risk running into you and Shirley around town. I'm sorry, but that's why we cut you off as well. If we didn't know how things were going with you, we couldn't slip up and say the wrong thing when we did see Dia. The trouble was, we rarely did see her. Then Mother met Shirley in the hospital. We were all devastated when we heard the news. You know Mother used to talk to Shirley a lot in there, don't you? Oh well, you do now. Shirley knew who Mother was. You know, she asked Mother to look after you and the girls. Hold on, you're supposed to be telling me why your mother was so surprised that Dia turned up here today. It was obvious to me that she didn't think Dia was coming. Well, some of our old girlfriends talked Dia into coming down the other day for my hen night. She looked better than she has for years that night, and we were getting on quite well together. But then one of the girls mentioned you were Russell's best man. And well, Dia kind of lost it. She almost went into hysterics and said she couldn't be here today if you were going to be here as well. So we assumed she wasn't coming. She was really adamant the other night. Mother changed the seating around so the empty chair wouldn't advertise Dia's absence. But you only had to say, and I would have bowed out. We know, Roger, you're a wonderful person, but we felt we couldn't disappoint the girls. They were so looking forward to being my bridesmaids. Weren't they wonderful? Yes, I was very proud of them. Their mother would have been proud if she could have seen them. I'm sure she would have. I wish I could have known her. From what Mother says, she was a wonderfully brave woman, and she was lucky to have had you as her husband. Anyway, the girls must have managed to talk Mercedes around. I know they worked on her all yesterday. Now, I'm going to ask a favor of you. You can say no if you like. On your wedding day, you know I couldn't refuse you anything. You've just made a mistake that I hope you won't regret, and I'm going to hold you to your promise. I want you to dance with Dea for me. Russell has danced with her a couple of times, but she won't join the family at our table. I think it's partly because you and the girls are sitting there. But I know she will not be able to refuse you anything. That's why I asked you to get her to join us for the photos. Thanks for doing that for me. By the way, you know I'll do anything for you today, kiddo. But I don't know, Estelle. Supposing Dea won't dance with me, or she throws a wobbly or something. No, I think Russell, and I have it planned. When he sees us go back in, he's going to ask Dea to dance again. You will dance with me. Between us, we should be able to collide with each other on the dance floor, and then we will change partners. It'll be a sort of coup de grace, or whatever they call it. Dea won't know what's happening until it's all over. I'm sure Dea won't refuse to dance with you once you've got your arms around her. Then, when the song finishes, you take her over and sit her by Mother and Father. I'm sure once she's there at our table, she won't walk away from it again. Are you sure this is a good idea, Estelle? To be honest, Roger, I don't know. But Dea needs to realize that we, the family, don't hold a grudge against her, and hopefully, you don't either. I thought things were going so well the other night at my hen party, but the mention of you kind of undid things a little. Well, I'm hoping the Roger effect will work both ways. Go on then, lead the way. Lead the lamb to the slaughter. Oh, Roger, don't be like that. Go on, I'm only fooling you. Oh, Roger, I've got to tell you that Mother's coming to see you in the morning as well. She's got something for you. You will be in, won't you? Yes, I should imagine so. The girls are so worked up. They will probably be awake all night. Estelle took my arm, and I led her back into the main hall. As if on cue, the band started playing a waltz, and we mingled with the other dancers. Very quickly, I saw that Russell had gotten Dea up on the floor, and he was guiding her inexorably in our direction. The slight bump and swift changeover of partners did indeed take Dea completely by surprise. For a moment, I believed she didn't realize what had happened. Then she went very stiff as she became aware of my presence. Come on, Dea, you can dance better than that. Just relax and let go. Relax, she did. For one horrible moment, I thought she was going to faint, but she regained herself and maybe snuggled in a little too close. I realized she was leaning against me and wasn't too steady on her feet. As the waltz ended, I led, half-carried, her to the chair beside her mother. Frank came over and sat on the other side of her. I withdrew and sat myself by my daughters at the same table, who demanded to know where I'd been. The band was quite loud, and I couldn't hear what Dea and her parents were saying to each other, but it was nice to see Dea talking to her parents. Around 11, I thought I'd better take my girls home. It was way past their normal bedtime, and they'd had a long, busy day. As I said my good nights, Estelle and her mother touched cheeks with me and kissed the girls. My girls also kissed goodnight along with the others, but I don't think they had any idea who Dea was. As I had guessed, it was a long night. Tired as my girls were, they were more hiked up than I'd ever seen them in the past, and they had a lot of trouble getting to sleep. The following morning, the girls and I got up pretty late. Well, let's be honest here, the girls were up way before me. It was a bright, sunny day, and they drove me nuts to get out of bed so they could get into the swimming pool. They were good kids. They wouldn't go into the back garden where the pool was if an adult wasn't present. Something else Shirley had instilled into their psyche. Just before noon, Catherine and Frank came walking around the side of the house. The girls and I got out of the pool to greet them. It was strange how the girls had taken to Catherine and Frank. I think I told you that there was a rift in my family. My parents doted on my brother's children, but hardly wanted to know mine. Shirley's folks had retired to the South Coast before her problem was diagnosed. We visited with each other quite often, but the children had never bonded with them like they appeared to have bonded with Catherine and Frank. After the children settled down, and I supplied everyone with cold drinks, Catherine asked me if we could have a word in private. She said Frank would look after the girls. By the time I came out with the cold drinks, Frank was already in the pool with them. He must have been wearing his swimsuit under his sports trousers when he arrived. I led Catherine into the lounge from where we could still see the children and Frank playing with them. Once we'd seated ourselves, Catherine opened the bag she was carrying and produced an envelope from it. Shirley asked me to wait 6 months after Anyway, she asked me to give it to you. She wrote a lot of it herself before. Well, she was very bad towards the end, as you well know, and she found writing difficult. She dictated some of it to me. Catherine held out the envelope, which I took from her and began to open. I'll go outside with the others while you read it. If you want to talk about anything, you know I'm here for you. I unfolded the pages of the letter, some of which were covered with Shirley's gradually deteriorating scrawl and others apparently in Catherine's neat hand. Dear Roger, K. Loverboy, how are you and our girls getting on without me? I know that when you read this, I'll have been gone for 6 months. Well, that's how long I asked Kathy to hang on to it before she gives it to you. This is very hard for me to write. I'm not sure I even know what I want to say to you or how to say it. Please forgive me if it doesn't sound right. Roger, I feel guilty not only for leaving you, but also for marrying you in the first place and bringing all my problems into your life. We'd only been dating a couple of weeks when the doctor gave me the news. It took me some time to decide whether to tell you about it or not. I was frightened you'd stick by me because of some twisted sense of duty. You know you were that kind of man, but I must tell you I loved you, and I know you loved me for myself. When you encouraged me to have the girls, although you knew you were most likely going to have the job of raising them alone, I knew that it wasn't pity you felt for me, but real love. I'm sorry. I can never repay you for all that love you have shown me, Roger. I have loved you more than any man I have ever known. I know that you do not believe there is an afterlife, but I hope one day you are proved wrong, and we shall meet again. There, that's the worst part over with. Now I must ask you to think of the rest of your life, and our girls' lives. I'm going to ask you to do me a big favor. I'm going to ask you to find another mother for our girls. They are going to need a mother around when they get older, and you are going to need a companion for yourself. Having met Catherine, I think I even know who the best candidate probably is, and I think that in your heart you know as well. Catherine has told me a lot about Mercedes and you, and what happened between the two of you back then. From what Kathy has told me, I'm sure that Mercedes did and still does love you, but she was under that horrible girl's influence. I know it's not a nice thing to say, but it did work out in my favor, even though I know it upset you at the time. They say that the Lord moves in mysterious ways. Please think about finding Mercedes again. Show her the compassion and love that you've shown me in the last few years, and hopefully she will love you and my girls as much as I do. Roger, I know that she loves you. At this point, the letter changed to Catherine's handwriting. Catherine and Frank have become good friends of mine since I've been in the hospital this time. I've also gotten to know Estelle, who came to see me the other day. Estelle loves you as well. God, you are a lucky man. All these people whose lives you've touched love you. Kathy assures me that she is going to keep a friendly eye on you and our girls. You know that they haven't got any grandchildren yet, and they assure me they will treat our girls as if they are their own grandchildren. Please allow them to do that. Whatever happens, Kathy's been a good friend to me during these long, lonely nights. Anyway, if all goes well, and you do as I hope you will, Catherine and Frank will be the girls' real grandparents. I've got nothing else I can think of to say to you, but thank you, Roger, for loving me. And remember, if I can, I will always be watching over you and the girls from wherever I am. Goodbye, my love, Till we meet again. Shirley. The signature, which had 8 crosses scrawled under it, one for each year we'd been together, was in Shirley's shaky hand. I sat and cried for I don't know how long before Catherine came back into the lounge with a cup of tea for me. I can only assume she'd been watching me read the letter through the lounge window. I suddenly became aware that I couldn't hear the girls playing in the garden anymore. I must have looked around in a panic. "It's all right," Catherine said. "Frank has taken them out in the car to get ice cream. It's plenty warm enough for them to be in their swimsuits today." "Thanks, Catherine. You obviously know what Shirley says in this letter." "Yes, but just because I do know, you don't have to do as Shirley suggests where Mercedes is concerned. The content of that letter is private between you and Shirley. It is no business of mine, and my lips will always remain sealed about that letter's content." "Thank you, Kathy. But tell me, what do you think of Shirley's ideas?" "I will try not to advise you one way or the other, Roger. As Mercedes' mother, my opinion would be biased, and it is your decision to make. But I think it's only fair to all concerned that you at least get to know Mercedes again before making any decisions. Well, she might not want to marry me anymore. We've been apart for some years now. I'm trying my hardest not to influence you one way or the other, Roger, but I've got to tell you, yesterday Mercedes was saying how lovely your girls were and how she wished they were her own children, and of course with all the consequences that come from that. I must have looked confused because I couldn't understand what consequences Catherine was alluding to. Damn it, Roger. She was saying she wished she had married you when she had the chance. The girl is heartbroken whenever she sees you. Oh, I'm sorry. I understand you now. You know that I still had strong feelings for Dia. Walking away from her was the hardest thing I ever had to do in my life. As a matter of fact, I had to force myself to be angry with her, to almost hate her. I'm not sure I can put those feelings behind me now. Are you going to try? Well, of course I am. It was Shirley's last request of me. I can never forget that. But I think I'm going to have to get to know Dia socially again before I can make any decisions. I'm going to need to know if the girls take to her and how she takes to them before any thoughts of a relationship between us can be contemplated. You're no fool, Roger. I can see that you've got your priorities right. The children must come first, of course. We need to get them together with Dia somehow and watch to see if any kind of affinity builds between them. Yes, I've got to be careful they don't think someone is trying to replace Shirley in their lives. If that should happen, it would be a disaster for everyone. I don't want to play with these affections and then be forced to walk away again because the children are unhappy. From what Estelle told me happened with Portia before, I couldn't do that to her again. Catherine leaned towards me and kissed my forehead. Shirley really had you pegged, didn't she? She said you were the most thoughtful person she had ever come across in her life. I must have blushed with embarrassment then because I suddenly felt very hot. Well, how are we going to? I think my voice faded a little. I'm sure Shirley would think it's a wonderful idea. Remember, Roger, she did say she wanted you to find another mother for the girls. At a ridiculously early hour on Saturday morning. Well, early for me anyway. I awoke to hear my daughters talking to someone downstairs. After dragging myself out of bed, I found Estelle and Russell unloading all sorts of goodies from their car. It was then that I realized just how much effort Shirley had put into these pool dues, as she had called them. They had brought along lots of things that I had overlooked. Well, I had never had to think about them in the past. Estelle later told me that Catherine had been given a list of things I'd forgotten by my girls when she called in the previous evening. I wondered why they hadn't pointed out my oversights to me. When I asked them, they said that I was going to be too busy. The lawns needed to be mowed before any of the guests arrived. Do as you're told, Roger, and don't ask questions, I thought. I told you Shirley had trained them, and me well. Just after lunchtime, some of the guys who worked for me began to turn up with their wives and girlfriends, as did some of the neighbors with their children. Catherine and Frank arrived at about 1:30 with a very quiet Dia in tow. She looked embarrassed to see me at first, but was soon playing with Estelle and the children in the pool. I think she was wearing one of Estelle's bathing suits. It looked kind of familiar. I spent most of the day circulating, often with Russell as company. I think I heard the story of almost every day of their honeymoon, except for the private stuff. It's speculation, but I don't think they got out of bed for the first 2 days. Well, Russell didn't mention it in those 2 days anyway. It's funny, but sometimes it's what folks don't say that is the most telling. Around 9 o'clock in the evening, I thought it was about time the children went to bed. Russell gave me a nudge as Dia went up with Estelle to settle them down. Half an hour later, when the 2 sisters came back down, I went up to kiss my girls goodnight. "Is that really her, Daddy?" My oldest asked me the moment I got into their bedroom. "Who are you talking about?" I asked. "Dia, is she going to be our new mother?" The younger one explained. "Hold on. Where did you two get the idea that there is going to be a new mommy?" "Don't be silly, Daddy. Mommy told us a long time ago that you'd find another mother for us." "Oh, she did she? And what else did your mommy tell you that she didn't tell me?" "She said that Estelle's sister would probably be our new mother, and we were to help you catch her." "Catch her? What did she mean by that?" "Mommy said Dia got away the first time, and if you got friendly with her again, we should help you catch her." "Oh God, Shirley, you really set me up, haven't you?" "Sorry, Daddy, I couldn't hear what you said." "Oh, nothing, girls. I was just offering a prayer to your mother. Now give me a kiss goodnight, and we'll talk about things tomorrow." "Is Dia coming over again?" "We like her." "I don't know, baby. She might." "Well, if she doesn't come over, can we go and visit her?" There comes a time in everyone's life when you have to admit that you are on a losing wicket and throw in the towel. I figured this was my time. "Okay, girls, if Dia doesn't come to see us tomorrow, we will go and see her. Now, will you both please go to sleep?" "Good night, Daddy," they said in unison. I'm damn sure I heard them giggle as I left the room. When I got to the stairs, I halted and sat down on the top step. I could hear the party going on outside, and someone doing something in the kitchen. For just a little while, I needed some time alone to think about what my girls had said to me. "Bugger, don't talk rubbish, you bleeding idiot. You've got to think about everything," a little voice in my head seemed to say. It was obvious to me that my girls liked Dia from the moment they saw her. I remembered the way they looked at her at Estelle's wedding. The question was, did I like Dia anymore? What a bloody stupid question to ask myself. Like her? I loved her. Well, I did once, didn't I? Although it was me who pushed her away, because I wasn't going to share her affections with Tish. Well, Tish wasn't in the equation anymore, but my girls were. Yeah, I think I could see myself sharing my girls with Dia. Hey, how did that question get turned around? And if I think back, what was it that Shirley had said to me on more than one occasion? "Half of you is enough for me, Roger." What did Shirley mean by that statement? Had I never given Shirley all my love? Had she known there was a place in my heart that belonged to Dia? Damn, that woman could read me like a bleeding book. Bugger, why does life have to be so bloody complicated? Wouldn't it be nice to be one of those people who see everything in black and white? I seem to have so many different thoughts going on in my mind at the same time. Right, Roger. Let's think this out logically. Do you love Dia? Yes, I'm damn sure I do. Do the girls love Dia? Well, they've only just gotten to know her. They certainly appear to like her. That's to be expected. There isn't much to dislike about Dia, but they can't love her yet. They have only just met her. They do appear to be prepared to accept Dia as a surrogate mother without question. Now does Dia like the girls? From what I saw of them together by the pool, she's really taken with them. No, I don't think that was an act. Dia's mind doesn't work that way. No, Dia was having a great time with my girls. I could see them bonding together very quickly. Now, the big one. Does Dia still love you? Well, there's only one way to find out the answer to that, you silly sod. Go and ask her. Back outside, most of the folks who were still there were sitting in a big circle on the patio by the pool. Russell was walking around, keeping everybody's drinks topped up, while Frank was still playing with the barbecue, scrubbing it down. I think Frank was a more conscientious cook than I ever was. As I approached the circle of chairs, Catherine got up and came towards me. Mercedes and Estelle are in the kitchen doing some of the washing up. I think this would be a good time for you to have a talk with Mercedes alone while she's got her hands in the sink. Don't worry, Estelle will make herself scarce when you get in there. Between you and my two girls, you're planning to get Dia and me married off a bit quick, aren't you, Roger? I can assure you that none of us has said anything to Mercedes about you and her getting back together, but I'm afraid the girls were asking her some embarrassing questions earlier. We weren't expecting that. So I gather. I think Shirley had been making plans for a long time. I just wish she'd let me in on them. Tell me, Catherine, exactly how long did you know Shirley? You didn't just meet her on her last day in hospital, did you? Well, no, Roger. We met at the Cancer Sufferer Support Group, didn't you know? No, Shirley never talked about what went on there. So she was planning this reconciliation between Dia and me for some time then. To be honest, Roger, I don't really know when she found out who I was. Shirley asked me about you and Dia. I told her the truth as I saw it, but she did say to me more than once that if you two got back together, she would not have to worry about you and the girls. Damn it, I know for sure now that Shirley knew me far better than I knew myself. Woman's intuition, Roger, you chose a wonderful wife in Shirley. Now, why don't you go and have a quiet word with Mercedes? I went into the kitchen where Dia was washing while Estelle dried. I took the drying cloth from Estelle before Dia had realized I'd entered the room. For a few minutes, Dia continued washing and placing things on the draining board while I took them to dry. Then she suddenly stopped what she was doing. She must have seen my arm taking the place she had just put down. She turned and looked at me. It's been a long time since we did this together, Dia, I said. Dia didn't reply. She just looked at me. I placed the plate in the rack and held out my hand for the next one. Dia passed me the dirty plate she had been about to wash. Shouldn't it go in the water first? Oh, I'm sorry. I wasn't thinking, she said as she took the plate back and started to wash it. I would say you were thinking, but not about the washing up. Dia, tell me, what were you thinking? Do you really want to know? I wouldn't ask if I didn't want to know. I was thinking what a bloody idiot I am. And why is that? Well, I had the chance of spending the rest of my life with you, and I threw it away. How could I have been that stupid? Maybe you weren't stupid. My wife, Shirley, was a believer, though I've never been. But she always did say the Lord moves in mysterious ways. Perhaps if he does exist, and I'm not saying he does, he had a job for me to do before we got married. Now I think that job is over, and there's a job for you to do now. And what's that? Well, there are 2 little girls upstairs who are missing a mother. They seem to be of the opinion that you are the chosen one. Dia looked at me with a confused expression. Let's put it this way. They had some nice new dresses they wore as Estelle's bridesmaids, and now they want to wear some more as your bridesmaids. Roger, are you asking me to marry you? Well, no. I don't have to ask you that question. I asked you that question years ago. I'm still waiting for you to name the bloody day. Wrong thing to say. 2 plates got broken. The one Dia was washing when she dropped it as she almost fainted, and the one I dropped as I went to catch Dia before she fell. The sound of the plates breaking brought Catherine and Estelle into the kitchen from the hall, followed by 2 little tykes who should have been in bed. I had the nasty suspicion that they were all eavesdropping out there, and Frank came running in the back door from the garden. The scene presented was me holding Dia in my arms. Catherine and Estelle started crying. My girls, who had big grins on their faces, couldn't understand why they were doing that, nor could they understand why their daddy and Dia had started crying either. I thought you 2 were in bed asleep, I managed to say to them, once I had gotten my emotions under control. Come on, I'll take you back up. No, Roger, I'll do it. I've got to get used to looking after them. Dia said as she extracted herself from my embrace. Come on, girls, we've got lots to talk about. It worked miracles, and a month later was our wedding day. Russell and I got to the church early, and I asked him to wait while I had a word with Shirley. I walked over to her grave alone. Well, girl, you set me up good and proper, didn't you? Now, this was your idea, so I don't want you getting upset with me over it. I think you're right, though. Dia will make a great mother for the girls. Look, Shirley, you realize what you've done here. Dia is going to want some children of her own sometime, so don't you dare hold it against me when we get all cozy with each other. Well, I'd better go now, but I'll be back with the girls in a couple of weeks. Dia and I are going away tomorrow for a week or so, but I'll tell you all about it when we get back. Bye for now, babe. 10 minutes later, I was standing before that same altar again, only this time I changed places with Russell. I've got to admit I was surprised that my family, without exception, had all turned out. I think that was Catherine's doing. She can be a very persuasive woman when she wants to be. The thing I was curious about was that 8 of my workers were all dressed in identical new suits, most unusual for that lot, unless they got a job lot from somewhere, which I doubted. They were sitting on the ends of the pews by the aisles, not with their respective loved ones. I smelled a rat. They were up to something. As the service ended, all 8 of them got up and left the church before Dia and I had started the parade out. As we walked through the main door, the guys standing in 2 neat lines confronted us, long-handled shovels at their shoulders. Someone called out a command, and the shovels were first placed at the present, and then into a line of arches for Dia and me to walk under. You buggers, I said to them as we stopped under the arches while the photographer took pictures. We ain't finished yet, one of them said under his breath in reply. I wondered what the buggers had planned next. Then we had the usual photo call. During the photo call, Dia came into possession of a large bouquet of flowers. When the photographer finished, we began to make our way toward the waiting limousine. Dia suddenly stopped. Will you wait here for me a moment, Roger? There's something I've got to do. Now please don't move. I stood and watched as Dia walked over to Shirley's grave and placed the bouquet she was holding alongside the one I had left there before the wedding service. For a few moments, she stood there alone. I could tell she was saying something, but like everyone else, I could not hear what she said. I figured it was private between her and Shirley. Then she signaled to my girls, who joined her and placed their small bouquets on their mother's grave as well. I now realized where the 3 bouquets had come from at Estelle's wedding. It was obvious if I'd only thought about it. Once Dia joined me, we continued toward the limousine only to see it move away as we got near. It was replaced by my old Bedford van. The last time I'd seen it was 3 weeks before, when the guys decided our yard needed a cleanup. I thought it had gone to the breaker's yard. Now it stood there looking better than I think I'd ever seen it. Bright new paintwork, ribbons hanging from the ladders mounted on the roof rack, and a liveried chauffeur at the wheel. The boys opened the sliding side door. They had kitted the back out with a sofa for Dia and me to sit on. It's a convertible, boss. If you get impatient, just pull the lever under the arm, and you've got a bed. One of the boys whispered to me with a smile on his face. With smiles all around, Dia and I climbed inside. The sliding door was locked in the open position for the short drive to the hotel where the reception was being held that night. Dia and I spent our first night together as man and wife. I awoke at some unearthly hour in the morning to the sound of Dia sobbing. "What's wrong, babe?" I asked. What a stupid way to ask her. "Nothing. I'm just so happy. But I'm annoyed with myself for how I behaved towards you. I thought you would wait forever." "Well, we're together forever now, so stop dwelling on the past," I said as I took her in my arms and kissed her. Our past was never mentioned again. The girls started calling Dia mother very quickly. I noted they only ever called her mother and never mommy, as that was what they called Shirley. Whose idea the difference was, I don't know, but I would often hear Dia ask the girls how mommy would do this or that. Dia would always do as Shirley had before her. Several years were to pass before that train sounded its whistle in that tunnel again. We had all settled down to watch a video one evening when the telephone rang. Our eldest answered it while I paused the video. "Who's calling?" I heard my daughter ask. "Mother, it's for you." Someone called Portia. Dia took the telephone from my daughter, and after pressing the speakerphone function, replaced the handset. "Hi, Tish. How are you keeping?" "Oh, Dia, how wonderful to hear your voice. I'm in a real state. I caught George running around on me, so I'm getting divorced. I really could use meeting up with you for a chat. You know, we could get together like the old times." "Well, yes, I suppose I could meet you, and we could do lunch." "Tish, hold on a moment while I check my diary," Dia said as she picked up her handbag. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Dia was going to get back with Portia. Dia saw the amazed expression on my face and smiled at me. "What's the date today?" Dia asked, not directed at anyone in particular. "The 3rd of August, came Portia's disembodied voice from the phone. "How about the 6th of August, 2026? Dia said, "I might be free that day." "Did you say 2026? Portia's voice sounded puzzled. "Yes, Tish, 2026. "No, I'm quite serious. All of our 3 children should be out of the house by then, so I should be able to find some time to do lunch with you." 3 children. I thought Roger only had 2. Actually, Roger and I have 2, and at the moment, there is a chance it could well be 2 and 2 bits. After all, twins do run in my family. Goodbye, Tish. Give me a call in about 20 years. With any luck, we'll have changed our phone number by then. Dia switched off the telephone and then sat back in her chair, staring at me with a silly grin on her face. Our 2 girls were quicker on the uptake than I was, and they started to laugh. Suddenly, I realized what Dia had just said to Portia. "Twins?" I asked. "Well, that's what the doctor thinks, but it's a little early to be sure yet," Dia replied. "I was hoping to know for sure before I told you and the girls." I was stunned for a moment. "You mean we're going to have a baby?" Dia smiled warmly. "Yes, Roger. I think we are. And maybe even 2. I felt a surge of joy, and before I knew it, I had picked Dia up in my arms, spinning her around the room as our daughters laughed and clapped their hands. "We're going to be a big family," I exclaimed. I put Dia down gently and kissed her, feeling the happiness swell within me. In that moment, I realized that everything Shirley had hoped for us was coming true. We were building the life she wanted for me and the girls, with Dia as a loving part of it. And maybe, just maybe, she was watching from wherever she was, smiling down on us. Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.